Life is precious. I think we would all agree. But often we find that we take the very things that we do every day for granted until something happens in a blink of an eye. Hey, I'm Tom Russo, and this is In a Blink of an Eye, where we discuss stories from ordinary people whose lives are changed in an instant and how they overcome through faith, courage, and determination. Join me on this podcast for uplifting stories of how people face various challenges and learn not only to survive, but thrive. In a Blink of an Eye is sponsored by Marketplace.live. Find what you need and what you want at Marketplace.live. That's Marketplace.live. Now, we are joined today by a wonderful friend of mine, Guido Piggott. Guido, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
We are really excited to hear your story because you were one of the most inspiring men in my life and anybody that I've ever talked to. And you have taught me so much throughout my life, but you have also been an inspiration to me and to so many others. And I can't wait to dive into your story. But I always like to kind of start like at the beginning. You know, where are you from? Tell us a little bit about your growing up, some of your likes, dislikes, whatever, and a little bit about your family, and then we'll lead up into the blink of an eye.
Sure. So, I was actually born in Shreveport, Louisiana. I'm 72 years old now. I moved to Houston in 1964. I have two older sisters. Houston is not nearly the impact in their lives as it was mine when I was here. I moved here in the 6th grade. So this is really what I consider home, and went to school in Austin, Texas at that wonderful university that you care so much about.
Do they still have a school? They have a football program, I think, don't they?
They do. They do. A renowned one at that. But went to school in Austin, came back and began a career in banking. That was kind of an interesting story in itself, but I had no intention of being a banker when I went to school in Austin, even when I transferred into business school. But that's where I wound up, and now I'm here 48 years later, and that had turned out to be, the business love of my life. I enjoy banking, met so many people, trained so many people. So many people have helped me up by the bootstraps to become a good banker. And so that's a huge part of my life.
Well, and that, of course, is where we met, and I believe we met in 1996, if I remember correctly. And we met at a bank called Central Bank, and that's where our careers kind of intertwined, and you became an important part in my life. Now, through the years, there's been many ups and downs. We all have them. But one of the things that has amazed me about you has always been your faith and your strength with your faith. But I know there was something that happened in 2017 that affected millions of people, but it really impacted you. Tell us a little bit about what happened in 2017.
Sure. So the blink of an eye for me, Tom, came a few minutes after midnight on Sunday, August 27th of 2017. Now, I assume most of your subscribers will recall Hurricane Harvey and the
Yes.
incredible impact it had on the Houston area. While I've been through several large hurricanes in Houston, I have lived here since 1964. None of my prior experience had me remotely prepared for what would happen when the rising waters resulting from the storm began to penetrate our home. Now, this was our final dream home for my wife, Lori, and myself. We bought our home in 2012 to be closer to our church so we could do a weekly Bible study in our home. We
Stop for
both
just
planned
a
this to be our
second.
final destination, assuming health would allow that.
Yeah, stop for just a second. I want the viewers to be able to see a picture of those floodwaters over that dream home of yours. You shared a picture with me. I'm going to have that here for them. Sorry to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Sure. So I thought what I'd do, Tom, is just start out a little bit just to give people perspective, just some factoids on the storm itself. the storm came inland over Texas in August on August the 23rd. You notice it impacted our house on the 27th. It's a long time for a hurricane to hang around. It was a Cat 4 with 130-mile-an-hour winds when it came in. It generated over 50 inches of rain in the greater Houston area, and they've estimated that was the equivalent of 2.5 trillion gallons of water.
That's with a T.
There were 50,000 plus homes that were flooded, and over 30,000 people were displaced. There were over 500,000 cars in Houston that were flooded. And then when the storm finally came inland, the worst possible thing that could happen did. It slowed to the point that it hardly moved for the next 4 to 5 days.
It was crazy. I remember that too, that exact time you were talking about. My kids were just coming back from a trip overseas, and we actually picked them up. They were the last flight to come into Intercontinental Airport that night, and as we were driving them back to our house, the cops were closing each exit as we went because they were flooding. So I remember that time greatly, and it too scared me more than anything I've ever been through. It was crazy. It was a crazy time.
Right. So, interesting thing about that too is the last thing, honestly, that I remember before the storm came in, there was a special on TV in Houston that night about the Cajun Navy. And that was something that I was fascinated by. You know, the Cajun Navy became infamous in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit. But it's just a group of informal volunteers. There's no legal structure that I'm aware of. But when disaster hits, they bring boats and trucks and supplies and help where they can. So that night, I think at about 8 o'clock at night, Laura and I were watching TV together, and there was a feature on the Cajun Navy. It was an awesome story, and we were watching together. I looked over; she was kind of getting quiet. I noticed she was crying, and you know, she looked at me and she said, "How awesome these people are to come to help us in Houston." And she paused for a few minutes, and she said, "Do you think we'll need to be rescued?" Well, you know me, the consummate uh, optimist. I said, no, there's no way
Absolutely.
it's going to come to our house. You know, it's already been 3.5 days. We've got this extra long driveway to get to our house and stuff. And so I said, no, I don't think it's going to be necessary, but boy, is that a great thing that they're around. Well, little did we know, about 10 minutes after midnight, um, one of our dogs was up trooping around and sounded kind of different. We realized that the dog was walking through water. So
Man,
the water had begun to come into our home. At peak, it got up to 24 inches, and it did that probably between midnight and about roughly 6 in the morning. It came in fast.
hard rain. I remember it being very hard rain. So needless to say, with 2 feet of water in your house, did a lot of damage.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the things that our church is really good for is that we do quite a bit of work in the area of disaster relief, similar to this. We had a huge storm called the Tax Day Storm before in Houston. Samaritan's Purse had come. They'd actually stayed at our church, and I had done probably about 30 mud outs with their team, learned how to do that and that sort of thing. That's where you go in, cut out the sheetrock and pull up wood floors and that sort of thing to get the property to the point where it would begin to dry and to eliminate the likelihood of mold growing on the property. So I had a lot of experience with that, but again, just when it's your own home, is nothing quite like it.
Can't
Really thought
even,
out afterwards. Didn't realize it at the time, but I was in total shock when it was happening.
right. Right.
and Lori too.
I can see how that would just be something totally out of. It's like watching a movie. You just don't think it's going to happen to you, and when you're thrust into that situation, that's the whole concept of in a blink of an eye. Is that you don't think that that thing is going to happen to you, and so tell us a little bit about what happened next.
That morning, Lori and I got up. We spent the night upstairs. We took our dogs upstairs. We spent the night on the second floor. Our master bedroom is down. Realized there really wasn't much we could do at 3 in the morning. We went upstairs. We moved as much furniture around as we could, and got things up off the floors to the degree that we could. Realized we just need to go to bed and deal with this the next day. So I had sent you a picture that I took that next morning as soon as the sun came up. It was taken about 6:15, 6:30 in the morning, and it's a shot from our upstairs on the second floor looking out over the street in front of our house.
Here's that
And
picture
when you
again.
see the picture, you'll notice there's a little tiny object to the left. That's our mailbox. It sits about 3.5 feet tall. It's on the curb, and the only thing that was standing up was the actual mailbox itself. Everything else it was covered with flood water. So I knew immediately as soon as I did that we were in big trouble. So I went downstairs, went out the front door. The water was, still, present in the home, but I was able to get through the front door and recognize that if I kind of walked right along the house, the water was only about knee deep. As I went out further into the yard, it was chest deep. And so uh, our street runs from south to north, and as you go north, or I'm sorry, as you go south, it elevates. And so by about 3 houses down, it began to be like ankle deep. So that was our escape route. Came back and got Lori, kind of talked to her about what I thought we needed to do. It was a pretty simple plan. We each packed one black garbage bag, contractor bag. We got dog food for the dogs. We had 3 dogs in our house at that time: a German Shepherd, a Rhodesian Ridgeback, and a Chihuahua. And we packed for ourselves clothes for the next few days and toiletries, dog food, and decided to make a run for it.
If I remember correctly, your cars got damaged pretty bad too, right?
Lori's car was in the garage, and it was safe. It was elevated high enough. My car flooded, and at the time I thought it wasn't any big deal, but I realized later on that it had just barely gone above the bottom of the door entry. But in the Ford vehicles at that time, all the electrical wiring ran around there, and so it wiped out everything. We didn't know it at the time, but um,
So
knew that my car wouldn't start. Didn't know if that was just temporary or not. So I said, Lori, I think what we're going to have to do is find somebody. So I went back out, went my route again, and found a guy that lived in the neighborhood. I'd never met him before. He was driving a silver Toyota Tundra, and he said, "Hey, do you need help?"
that's just a God thing there. That's just a
Yeah,
God thing.
absolutely. Yeah, the crazy part about it was I rode in the back of his pickup truck with the 3 dogs. I never got his name, but the guy was kind enough. When he said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yo, man, you sure can." But I said, I got to go back inside and grab my wife and pack up a couple of things. And I said, we also have 3 dogs. He said, Don't worry about it, man. No problem at all. He said, my house didn't get affected. Love to help you guys out to the extent that I can. So I still to this day have no idea how we did it, but Lori and I were each carrying a garbage bag. She had 1 dog, I had 2 dogs, and we walked 3 houses up in water that was waist deep generally. until we got to the nearer water, got to his truck, and he said, "Where do you guys want to go?" And I went,
Good question.
oops. I said, a hotel nearby. And he said, "Do you know which one?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm sorry." I said, I just so messed up. I said, "I didn't even think. Just go to 249 and we'll find something." So we drove down Louetta to 249, and right at the intersection, a half a block away, was a comfort suites that we wound up living in for the next 60 days.
Two
Miracle
months.
again, God's hand of providence. It accepted dogs. We had three. They had a program going with FEMA where they would pay, the rental of the hotel would be covered, and so that's where he dropped us off, and we were able to kind of begin the resettlement, so to speak, of our lives.
I know that it took quite a bit of time to rebuild your house with all the woodwork and the uh,
Right. So the actual construction really lasted about 4.5 months. It was a month and a half before we approved to start it, and that's another big part of this story. How we got a relationship with a FEMA adjuster. But yes, we were able to rebuild. We were out of our house from August 27th until May the 8th, and we moved back in on May the 8th. And obviously, that was a memorable day in our lives. One of the things, Tom, that I've learned over the years, and as my Christian faith has grown, is how important perspective is. And I've been on the plus side of that for so many times, but I've worked with so many people over the years that have gone through trials and tragedies, loss of a child or loss of a job or, loss
and
of,
I.
marriage, whatever the case may be. Perspective is so important. And the things that I've learned about that is when you first of all begin to go through trials, you get incredibly self-absorbed and self-focused. And again, didn't recognize that in myself, but man, was I self-absorbed. It's like that's the only thing that mattered to me. And then you have a tendency to feel like you're the only ones going through trials like that. And then lastly, if you're not careful, you have a feeling that God has abandoned you. And so as we're working through the shock of these first few days, um, that was all that I could get through my head. It was like, what can I do to worry about myself?
It's
And
interesting that you say
historically, I'd always been one to worry about others
others.
more so.
Absolutely. You always have been. But it's interesting you say that, Guido, because this was really just the tip of the iceberg of this story, because there was something else brewing at the same time that I was working with you on, and we were really close at accomplishing something. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, in March of 2017, I left a bank job that I'd held for 10 years. Really had a lot of personal success there. The bank had done well, but it was a situation that was not pleasant personally, just with the way they dealt with their staff and particularly people that reported in to me. They treated me really, really well. But as you know, if
I
somebody
worked
does
there.
something to my
Yes.
staff, you might as well stick a pencil in my ear because I get a little ornery about that. So I began to put together a plan that was really about 2.5 years in the making, and decided in March of 2017 that I would venture out. We were going to do a de novo bank in Houston. We were going to start a new bank in Houston. Began to talking about it with my best employees, people like you and some lenders and some underwriters and that sort of thing. And we decided that we would make that a goal to accomplish. And so we engaged legal counsel, got a great lawyer that worked on that for us. The issue was that I had set aside my retirement funds and had decided that, I can work off of those funds to get us through until we get the bank open. So that thing was going remarkably well. We were able to get our private placement memorandum issued in June of 2017. By the middle of September, by the middle of August, we had actually brought in $27.5 million in commitments for capital. It's in almost 6 weeks' time. I mean, it was
We
going
were on the
fast.
putting
It was
green.
going
We were
great.
on the putting green.
And then that's where the parallel tracks began to run together. So when Hurricane Harvey hit, unfortunately, the bank was kind of the last thing on my mind for the first couple of days, and then I realized, my goodness. So the makeup of our investors were all predominantly Houston business owners. There was one of our directors and two of our investors that got hit hard by the storm, really bad. And I thought, well, we'll be able to survive that without those guys. We'll pick up some additional capital. But what began to happen was it was like the storm set over the bank as well as set over Houston. The business owners were concerned, rightfully so, about what impact it would have on the cash flow of their business. Even if their business wasn't impacted, they did business with hundreds of companies throughout the greater Houston area, and so there were concerns. A very common retort that I would get was, Guido, we love you, we love the plan, but that $500,000 I was going to invest in the bank, I need that for my business, so I'm not going to be able to invest with you. So in the span of 2 weeks, we went from $27.5 million down to just slightly under $20 million. We began to get additional commitments to fill that back up, and that was always the plan. We thought, we'll be able to do this. It'll be a little bit tough, but we'll be able to do it. And we got actually as high as 27 million again, but every time we would take a step forward, we took a step back. And so to me, became obvious by about Halloween that we weren't going to make it. We continued the push actually through the first couple of weeks of February, but finally we had to cast aside that dream to do that.
And that was a tough time. That was a
64
tough time
years
for all of
old,
us. Yeah.
no income,
Yeah.
and
So
I
so
don't, I
so
don't
you
know
you you have
about
these
you,
house
but
problems.
I found it to be a little difficult to get people to hire a 64-year-old banker to come into the industry and help their business.
So so
It
so
was a rough go.
painting the picture, you've lost your house, you've lost your car, you lost your dream of getting this bank started. It's a pretty dark time. You had to have a really low point. Tell me about that time in your life where you felt at your lowest, and tell me what turned it around for you.
It's crazy. The lowest event I can remember. You'll appreciate this, Tom, because I know so much about you personally. Lori was petrified of dentists. She hadn't been a dentist in years and years and years. And we're
I'm
there
with her.
on
I'm
one
with
Saturday night. We're exhausted. I don't remember exactly where it was in the timeline, but I think it was a month, maybe 3 weeks or something like that after we'd moved into the hotel. And in the middle of the night, this blood piercing scream comes out of her. And I went straight up into bed and she went, "Oh my God, I hurt, I hurt, I hurt." She's crying and stuff. She had a tooth that had cracked and had to be extracted, and it was causing her
a miss.
unbelievable pain.
Yes.
So again, your perspective is so important when you're in the midst of this. you don't have the perspective of all the great things that are going on. But I'm sitting there thinking, God, why are you letting this happen? You know, we've gone through all this, and now my wife has this incredible thing. We got up in the middle of the night. It was almost midnight again. Um, Took her to the emergency room. We found a Methodist emergency room on 249 that I didn't even know was there. All they were able to do is give her some pain medication, but it helped, and I think kind of restored our confidence that we'd be able to get through that temporary problem and stuff. But there's no question, it seems so silly with all the other stuff going on around us. That was the incredible low point.
And in that low point, and I'm speaking from my own personal experiences, especially with the recent experience. You get to that low point, and like you said, you kind of feel like, God, why have you forsaken me? You know, why I try to be a good steward. We all sin and we all have had problems, but you know, I try to keep a pretty straightforward life. Why is this happening to me? And you start doubting things, and you start fretting. And what was the point that turned it for you? That made you, you know, kind of slap yourself and say, okay, let's get it going right. We know God has this. We know God has this. What was that point?
Well, it was interesting. You know this again, but I'll share with the audience. So my favorite volunteer thing that I did at our church, we met in a movie theater at that time on 249 in North Point, and I was the leader of a team. We got there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and what had to happen for us to have church was they brought a trailer out from our main campus in the Woodlands. We unloaded everything, set everything up for church. Would have church service begin at 9 a.m. and another at 10:30. But then we had to break everything back down and put it back into a trailer because we didn't have any storage space at the theater. That was my job, and I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. You know, it fulfilled me in a way that was just phenomenal. Well, it was so unusual because I thought, man, when I can get back to church that first Sunday, and it was just a couple of weeks down the road before we had our church service again, that's going to be what's going to lift me up, you know, and really get me righted. It was a month, I think. It was like the shock started over again when I would go into the theater. It's hard to describe, but I was thinking I should be incredibly excited, but it
You
was
weren't.
hollow. It was like, again, all the negative thoughts were creeping in. It took a good while, but I talked about our Bible study that we had in our home, and about that time, a lady that I went to church with for a number of years said, "Hey," she said, I'm actually living with my mom now in Baytown. My house is empty." She said, "Why don't you use that for your Bible study?" And that was the beginning. That
That's
was the
great.
first thing that brought me up.
And it's those little things, the small gestures from people that really make you realize the hand of God is everywhere, and it will help you. And if you just believe and keep moving forward and keep having and knowing that you have those blessings, that it really it does. It's I the only thing I can say is it's better than a Band-Aid. It covers it, you know?
Yeah. He
You shared
as
with
he
me a
did with
picture of
Job,
one
we
of the
felt like we were redoubled, not just put back to status, but redoubled. Um, I mentioned a while back, Tom, perspective, and so I want to take a couple of steps back again and talk about a couple of other things, and then how all this began to come together. So the beginning of the recovery was the Bible study in Lisa's house. That night, as opposed to kind of how things were going with me at church, it just felt like a load had been lifted off of my shoulders, and it was joy again, even if just for an hour or so. Another thing that happened that was just absolutely phenomenal, mentioned FEMA paid for our hotel room for the first 30 days. We kept asking the manager of the hotel, hey, are we going to be able to stay here beyond 30 days? And she said, I don't really know. She said, we haven't heard yet. And I said, well, it's 30 days is 2 more days away. I said, what happens if you, well, she said, I'm pretty sure they'll do that. Well, that worked pretty well for me, but Lori was so nervous about it. And anyway, long story short, they renewed us for the next 30 days, but the same thing. They said, we don't know. It may end at the end of this 30 days. It may not. So one night in the hotel, I'm working on stuff for the bank, and I decided to take a break for a minute. And I looked at HAR, which is, the Houston Realtors website. And, it's a big, big portal, tons of information. But as soon as I opened it up, this pop-up came up and it said, Hurricane Harvey Special. It was a rental home not 6 miles from our house. Gorgeous home, prettier than our house, to be honest with you. It was amazing. And it had a guy's name and, said, if you're interested, reach out to me. So I immediately called him. It went to voicemail, but he sent me a text back and he said, if you could, can you call me tomorrow? So I said, well, sure. Long story short, he was such a gracious guy and stuff. He and his wife had bought that house, and his mother's, or I'm sorry, his wife's mother had gotten ill, and so they'd moved in with them temporarily, and they wanted to do something with the house. They weren't sure what to do with it. They talked about it and prayed over it and decided that they should offer to lease it to somebody in Hurricane Harvey. So things were going along spectacularly. I told him, I said, I've got a perfect credit rating, that sort of thing. I've got plenty of funds that I can pay you. But I said, most people are going to do a background check. I said, I don't have a job and I don't have any income. And he stopped and looked at me. He said, does that matter?
And that, my friend, is the hand of God. It is, because most
Incredible.
people it would matter.
I went back the next night, the night after that, and the night after that, and the night after that. That ad was never on HAR again. Again, you talk about the hand of God. I don't know. He said he'd put it up that day, and we answered. Anyway, long story short, that's where we stayed from November through May before we moved back in. Originally was a 90-day lease. He just said, you guys just stay there. You're taking great care of the house. We don't care. Whenever you need to leave, you just let me know a week or two in advance. So like, holy cow. So that was one perspective. The other was just the mud out experience. I told you I'd mudded out quite a few houses in Houston. I knew how to do it. So I started reaching out to people in our Bible study and friends at the church and friends at work, etc. The day we did our mud out, we had over 33 people come to our home to help us clean up, which was
That's just,
amazing.
that is that invaluable hand of God. And I want to stop for a second, and I know you shared a picture with me of a beautiful cross that one of your Bible study members made. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I guess the best thing I can say about that is that, God is always there. God is always there to protect us, and He knows what our needs are constantly. And so every time that I had a need, once my blinders came off and my perspective became restored, I began to see through a totally different lens. And so what I thought was the world's worst stuff became the world's best stuff. The adjuster that we had from FEMA Um, it was incredibly hot and humid. He came within, I think it was 2 days after we'd done our mud out. And that's really, really unusual. We had people that we knew that had flood insurance that didn't come for 90 days. He came to our house. We gave him some water and sat down and kind of talked about things for a while. And I, we just connected. Don't know why, but he said, "Well, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to help you." He said, "It's obvious you guys have a beautiful home here, and I'm going to do everything that I can." He said, "I've got to do some specific work while I'm here today." But he took his business card out and he wrote his cell number on the back and said, "Before you turn in anything to FEMA, you call me after you get my report, and I'm going to show you how to get the most money back on your claim."
He was
We must
taking
have
an
talked to that
added
guy for
note into
6
it. Yeah,
times.
that's fantastic.
So clearly God put him in our path. One of the directors in the bank called me and said, "Hey, I know you probably don't want to be doing the bank work from the hotel because their internet's not secured." And I went, "Oh no." I completely forgotten about that. So he gave me an office to work from all that time and stuff. There were so many great stories about people that came to give us a boost. We had a contractor that went to church with us also that offered to help us. Getting a contractor during
Was
the
almost
Harvey
impossible.
aftermath was the most difficult. We knew he was a pretty good contractor. He and his sister ran their business, and we were able to get them to do the work for us. Kind of a funny side story to that about the ups and downs again. My mother was living in Natchez, Mississippi at that time, and so Lori and I decided she was so worried about us that we needed to make a trip to Natchez. They were roughly about halfway through with the reconstruction of her home. Lori had talked to the sister and said, "Hey, we're going out of town. Do you want us to give you a payment before we leave?" And they said, "No, no, no, we're fine. There's some sort of issue with one of the subcontractors, but don't worry about it. You guys go and we'll catch up next week." Well, we get to Natchez, and just before we got there, about 30 miles out, my phone starts blowing up, and it's the contractor's sister. She says, "I am so sorry to bother you." She says, "Something's gone terribly wrong, but what we thought was just a hangnail with this subcontractor, he's really mad and she said, I think he's got a problem on another job, but he's demanding to get his money this weekend or he's going to put a lien on the property." I'm like, "Oh man, come on." I said, we offered to give you the check." "No, yeah, we know. So we thought, well, we'll get to Natchez, we'll call our bank, we'll do a wire transfer. Well, we got there. Our bank has wire transfer capability, but we hadn't set it up, and it was a Saturday. So long story short, we couldn't do a wire transfer. Lori and I got in our car, the 6-hour trip to Natchez, Mississippi from Houston. We'd been there an hour to visit with Mom. And then we said, "Something has come up. We're going to come back, but we have to drive to you." So 6 hours to Natchez, 6 hours to Houston, gave them the check, went to the bank and got cash to pay them, gave them the money, I mean, and then drove back to Natchez. So we had an 18-hour trip to Natchez, but we solved the problem.
Well, and again, I showed the picture here a minute ago, but the picture of the cross. Tell me the story behind the cross picture that you
Yeah,
showed.
so one of the members of our Bible study, Tom, is a great lady. She is so talented. She'll kill me if she listens to this broadcast when I say this. She's slightly older than I am, but she's one of these ladies that was raised in a time where she didn't knew how to sew and how to, do household things and that sort of thing. She's incredibly talented. So she was there the day of the mud out, and apparently, unbeknownst to us, after we'd hauled all the trash out and that sort of thing, she stayed around for about an hour in the front yard, and she got a couple of little bags with her and was picking up stuff in the backyard. So the picture of the cross that I sent you were remnants that she found in our front yard. They were all broken pieces of china or vases, things that were important to us. We knew they were ours by the pattern or the color on them, or, this was our Christmas set, and this was our Valentine's Day deal that we used for this, or whatever the case may be. And she put all those pieces onto a cross for us. And again, once that my perspective was renewed, she gave us that, by the way, that first night we had Bible study after we moved back in. So it was obviously a very special gift. The perspective that I was given was that the pieces represented how broken we were. But through God's love, He puts us back together and makes us better people for that.
Heart is racing. I mean, that's just a beautiful story. Well, let's end on a positive note. We know that things are going great for you. I do know that unfortunately Lori did pass away a while ago, but uh, beyond that tragedy, and in addition to the others, you have really moved forward. Tell us where we're at now. Where are you at now?
Well, call me crazy, but I'm in the process of buying a bank again. And Tom knows much about this because he's the first person I called once I decided that it was going to make another run at it. It's a
And I'm very
slightly
grateful.
different plan this time. About 95% of our investment capital is with the Vietnamese people in Houston. I was introduced to a Vietnamese gentleman by one of my lenders that Tom and I worked with jointly at a bank back in 2004. So she thought enough about me to recommend me as a bank executive to help this gentleman form a new bank. And so we've been working on and off because of different things since September of 2022. But we're now very close to the finish line. In order to open a new bank, you have to raise $30 million in capital, and you have to have regulatory approval. So as of today, we're at 28,480,000. Cross fingers. We've been promised the remainder of the funds to get us over 30 by Wednesday of next week. Sometimes people tell you that, and they're very diligent about it, and other times it takes a little longer, but we think we'll have our capital raise completed by next week. We're getting regular feedback from the regulators on our plan, and so if all falls in the right place at the right time, which God has certainly allowed to happen thus far, we will open a new bank in Houston in either October or November of this year. Sorry.
That is so exciting. I plan to be a big part of it. It was kind of a God thing because I was so despondent having to retire from teaching, as my listeners know. This kind of all fell together again, hand of God thing, kind of all at the same time. And Guido's been such an important part of my life. And so I am so excited about that next chapter for us. One last positive thing, and I know you've been doing it for a long time, but I know after this tragedy, I know you really stepped it up. Tell us a little bit about your ministry work, just briefly.
I'm sorry, say one more
Your
time, Tom.
your ministry work.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, as things kind of have evolved at the church, our theater in Tomball church began slowly, really never recovered from Hurricane Harvey, so I go to the main campus now, and so I don't have the opportunity to do the setup again. I kind of began to have an itch to do something differently, and once again, God put something in my path. I've learned to be really attentive to the Holy Spirit, and he said you should reach out to a lady named Lynn, and I reached out to her, and she said, I can't believe you called me. She said, I had you on my list to call tomorrow. She said, there's a nursing home in Tomball called Park Manor Tomball. And I said, oh, I'm very familiar with that. We did stuff with those residents every month for 5 years through our church in Tomball. She said, well, now they've finally reopened the doors after COVID, and they're looking for someone to come in and do a church service. And I said, oh man, that's great. I'd love to do that. I can get a team, and I've done these Bible studies for so long that that shouldn't be any problem. She went, well, hold on a minute. She says they actually don't want any videos. They say they can watch videos all day long. They want someone to come in and deliver a live
They deliver a
30-minute
message.
sermon. And so once again, I said, God, did you actually tap on the right person's shoulder for that? And he assured me that that was what he called me to do. And so we've actually been doing that for a little over 3.5 years now. We've done 3 funeral services. We've had 2 people give their life to Christ in a nursing home, which is totally amazing. I mean, you talk
Is
about
It's just another
gut-wrenching.
testament to your unbelievable faith and leadership. And I wanted to include that in this story because it's something that, as a good friend of yours, I am so incredibly proud of. Maybe the most proud of all the things that you've done is of that, because it's so touching to me. Guido, we've talked for almost an hour. So I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. Your story is
You don't
so
want another
inspiring.
hour's worth, Tom?
We probably could. I want to wrap it up here a little bit, so I'm going to kind of put a bow on it, and then we'll talk. But if you like hearing uplifting stories of overcoming challenges in life, click the like and subscribe button. It's right up there. Perhaps you have a story of your own to share: an accident, sudden loss, PTSD, alcohol, drug abuse, a natural disaster, illness, and you would like to share that journey of overcoming. Please contact me at the email shown below for consideration for a future podcast interview. I want to thank everyone out there, especially my family, our military veterans, and first responders who put their life on the line every single day. And I certainly can't forget about our teachers and our medical professionals who all make the world better, one person at a time. But most of all, thank God for all the blessings in our world. We just need to make sure we concentrate on them. Until next time, thanks to Guido Piggott, Carpe Diem, seize the day.